Okay. Thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Rachitaa Gupta. I am the global coordinator of Global Campaign to Demand Climate Justice. And thank you so much for joining us. We apologize, we were not able to give too much advance notice for this debrief, but we're still really excited to have you all here. The idea for this debrief session is to just hear from some of our members who were present in Bonn on how some of the negotiations developed, what were the key takeaways, what do some of the outcomes mean, and then what does it also mean as we head towards COP29. As you all know, this is a finance, quote unquote, finance COP this year, so like a big important COP. And so hence the intercessions were also key for us this year. And as always, it has been a tough Bonn session with the way the developed countries have engaged in some of the negotiations. So we have a very exciting panel today who will be covering a lot of these issues, and of course from Global South perspective as always. So we'll hear from Meena Raman on just giving us an overall picture. We have Tamra Gilbertson from Indigenous Environmental Network talking about Article 6. We have Leon Sealey-Huggins for War on Want talking about Just Transition Work Program, and we have Elodie Guillon who from World Animal Protection talking about food and agriculture. But we also hope to keep this session as interactive as possible. So please feel free to use the chat to introduce yourselves, where you're from, your organizations, your own reflections from these SBs, and also to use chat to ask questions. We do have interpretation in 2 languages today, which is Spanish and French. So please feel free to use the channel that you're most comfortable with. Please indicate it to us in chat if you need any support with interpretation, if the interpretation is not clear. We have Neha today who will be supporting with some of the logistics and tech. So if you have any tech challenges, please feel free to tag her in the chat and she can support. We'll create as much space as possible for question and answers. But we also want to hear as much deeply as possible from our panelists today. So without So I can see the language option on, and I hope you can see, you can just go to the more. If you do not see a globe icon at the bottom, you can just find it in the more menu under breakout rooms. There's an interpretation option, I think, somewhere where you can find the different languages. Okay, so without further ado, I'll invite Meena to kick us off on this session. Thanks, Meena.
Good evening, good afternoon, and I think for our part of the world in Asia, it's already night. And if I'm too fast for the interpreters, please, Rachitaa, give me the, make a sign or something so I can slow down. Well, for those of us who were in Bonn, we survived. And it actually was quite a difficult process. And already we know that there was this big hype coming from Dubai, this big thing about the world headlines about finally transitioning away from fossil fuels was a very important outcome. And then all the global mitigation efforts, and many of us were very concerned about some of the solutions that were being proposed, including carbon capture and storage, nuclear, and so on and so forth. So we saw the kind of false solutions that were being touted as part of the solution. And then, and this whole transitioning away from fossil fuels language also is in the context of a just, equitable, and orderly outcome. But what was the biggest takeaway from that, outcome of Dubai was that really there was no strong and firm way of saying that developed countries must do their rapid emissions reductions and must actually phase out from fossil fuels immediately, as soon as possible and rapidly. And so things that we would have wanted, we already always knew, that it was not going to be as easy as that. And so our biggest disappointment, of course, at Bonn was that the developed countries were again coming together, particularly in the mitigation work program, talking about how the Dubai outcome has to be reflected in the mitigation work program agenda and how it has to be taken forward. And you saw a big fight there between the developed countries together with the small island states, and also the least developed countries, who were saying, the mitigation work program is a very important program. You need to have the GST outcomes in terms of the mitigation efforts to actually have that move forward. So we need to see how that goes forward. But that did not happen because there was a big pushback from some of the developing countries. There was, of course, the Africa group was among them, the Arab group, and the like-minded developing countries, who basically, the technicality of that was that they said that this is not the mandate of the mitigation work program. And I just want to pause here for a while and give a context for that, because the big fight, as I saw in Bonn, was basically over finance and mitigation. This was once again one pitted against the other. And this is what we will see go forward in COP29 in Baku. So as we all know, and we all need to, DCJ members, and this is part of the action agenda that we have to push, is really the global stocktake as far as the Paris architecture is concerned. Once every 5 years, it's supposed to assess the collective progress, see whether parties are on track in terms of meeting the goals. We know everybody is way off track, particularly the developed world, whether it's on the emission reductions or the fossil fuel phase out, or including on the finance as well. So what you see happening is that the developed countries who pretend that they are really ambitious came to Bonn, and they were, what's important for us is to recognize that the GST outcome is supposed to inform the preparation of the next NDCs. So maybe let me just unpack that a little bit. The nationally determined contributions is this national process where all parties have to communicate their NDCs. This was the bottom-up process. We all knew that this is a bad way to go forward, because there is no way of measuring what is fair, what's equitable, and there is no carbon budget fair sharing of the effort that has to happen. In civil society, we have been talking about the fair sharing of the carbon budget. Many of us have been looking at the numbers, and we were very, very disappointed with the way in which this bottom-up, self-defined, nationally determined process has come about, particularly because of the United States. We lost the fight in the Paris Agreement when the only way forward was on a bottom-up, nationally determined manner. Now, so the global stocktake is supposed to inform the preparations. So right now, the parties are implementing, or they're supposed to be implementing their current NDCs, which is from 2021 to 2030. That we need to recognize. So in this decade, they're supposed to do what they had already communicated. And the next NDCs, which is 2031 to 2035, have to be communicated by February of next year. 9 months ahead at the COP, they have to do that. So this is the moment, if civil society is interested in ramping up the ambition and the pressure at the national level, particularly I think it's critical for the United States and the European countries, who have got no more business to continue to talk about net zero and talk about 2050 net zero and talk about false solutions and offsetting and not moving to real, zero and net negative emissions now. If you remember, for those of you who were born, Bolivia put an agenda item for developed countries to actually go net zero much more rapidly and to go to net negative. But this was off the agenda because developed countries don't want to talk about these things. So as we know, the big pretense about keeping 1.5 alive was really a big facade. And this is really what we all say is pulling the wool over the eyes. And those of us who know the details know that this is really not that something can be delivered. So at the national level, the time has come for all of us to be engaged with our national governments, and particularly in the north, as I said, if we are serious about fossil fuel phase out, particularly for the north, it has to be in their next NDCs. In fact, they should have revised their NDCs to move forward, but they're not going to do that. So the next NDCs is important. I know that Victor and others are part of the DCJ, and many of our campaigners in the US are talking about the fair share and others, and I think we can talk more about that. And so this is really critical. So if we want to have the translation, and those of them who talk about, oh, we need to keep 1.5 alive, how are they keeping 1.5 alive in terms of their NDCs? So we have to hold our governments to account in terms of the next NDCs, which is supposed to be communicated. Of course, we can't wait till 2031. It's really very far off, but this is the problem of this architecture that is there at the moment. But of course, we can continue to campaign as best as we can. So that's on the mitigation front. So the work has to happen now. This is my message. Don't wait for Baku. Don't wait for mitigation work program. That will not deliver what we want. The campaign and the action has to happen rapidly now in terms of the NDCs. The second is in terms of finance. Developed countries actually should put what they have going to contribute in terms of finance in their NDCs, but they won't do it. And this brings me to the question of the other GST outcome, which is about the finance discussion under what's called paragraph 97. I think it's important we as DCJ, although we are all campaigners working at the grassroots level, working at the national level and so on, very important for us to also understand the technicalities of it. It's not really that technical, it's really political. Because the paragraph 97 of the global stocktate outcome was about a process to anchor the finance issues on how the GST outcome can inform the progress and track progress on the finance outcomes. Because finance is the problem and is the linchpin for all ambition, particularly in the developing countries. So, of course, this is tied to the just transition. Guillon will talk more about that. So if we want a just, equitable, and orderly transition, and we want a just transition, not only for the workforce, but also for all sectors of our society, taking into account the inequalities that exist, the inequities of the North-South, the inequalities at the national level, and the sectors that will be most affected by measures that are taken, including even if you remove fossil fuel subsidies, how does the poor people in our society, how will they be affected? How do you deal with those who are energy poor? How do you deal with those who are thrown out of jobs because of the measures that are taken? So these are all very critical issues. Finance is the big piece. Now, as we know, the US $100 billion per year, which was the Cancun and Cancun promise, never got delivered. The developed countries came to Dubai last year and said, oh, they have delivered. But if you look at the numbers, a lot of it is actually loans. They, as I say, they always count everything as their mother, father, grandfather, dog, cat, everything is climate finance, and that they have delivered. And this is really a big problem because it's not really delivered in terms of where it needs to be. And particularly if you take the Oxfam reports, which are very helpful for us, actually showed that, it's not 100 billion, but it's actually much more like 23 billion or so. And so, and these are important factors that we have to see on the finance side. So we know that there's this new collective quantified goal on finance. Rachitaa said Baku is supposed to be about the finance COP. Now, I think, is the finance COP, or is it going to be a big zero? Now, this is what we have to watch out for. Because in Dubai, there was an agreement to have an ad hoc work program for the new collective quantified goal on finance, which is a process to actually draft the negotiating text, because the developing countries did not want this to be only done in Baku because there would not be enough time. It's a very political issue. So they want a draft negotiating text happening now, or to be developed, and you have this ad hoc work program on the new collective quantified goal to do this. And so there is an input paper that was discussed in already from Cartagena in May. Then there was a session in Bonn. Another session is going to happen. There's another 2 more sessions that will happen before we land in Baku in terms of the the negotiating text. But what we see in the input paper, or what the co-chairs have drawn up, very clearly there's nothing on any number. The whole task of the new collective quantified goal on finance is to define the number. But developed countries do not want to talk about the number. And this is really because this is very political. Election year in the UK, election in France, election in the European Parliament, which has concluded with the right gaining more seats, election year in the US. None of them are going to be bold enough or progressive enough. They've never been progressive. We don't expect them to be progressive. Only strong civil society campaigning and at the national level, together with other constituencies, that's the only way in which we can we have to hold the governments to account. So this is the DCJ will in the next few weeks talk about the escalation campaign. Many of us in Bonn already started to talk about step up and pay up, the step up and pay up campaign. And we are seeing this in the context of the reparations, because a lot of the crises that we are seeing today are really the root of our colonial histories and post-colonial independence, and still all the structures and dependence that have created a south-north flow of resources rather than a north-south flow of resources. And then we have the historical responsibility, the carbon debt, and so on and so forth. So for us, finance is absolutely important. Now, come to Bonn and you hear, and even in Cartagena at the last meeting of the ad hoc working group on the NCQG, you hear the developed countries saying, this is a voluntary issue. Climate finance is voluntary, because if you look at Article 9.3 of the Paris Agreement, it says that as part of the global effort, developed countries will take the lead. It never does not say shall, so therefore it's a voluntary, aspirational, voluntary mobilization, which is absolutely nonsensical, because they are looking at Article 9 of the agreement without looking at Article 9.1, which very clearly says developed countries shall provide the finance. And it's a shall obligation that they don't talk about it. So they look at 9.3 and say they don't have a mandatory obligation. Then there's this big discussion. One more minute or what minute? One more minute? Yeah. So then there's a big discussion about the contributor base. Now, I think for us, we need to be very clear. In Paris, there was this big fight. Is developing countries who are in the position to do so should be part of the contributor base. That discussion happened, big fights happened, and there is what's called the Article 9.2 of the Paris Agreement, which says other countries can voluntarily do so. So they can voluntarily do so. If you want China to contribute, you want Saudi Arabia to contribute, you want the United Arab Emirates to contribute, it's voluntary. And the UAE actually did that. And China has its own bilateral, and it gives a lot of money to small islands and so on. And so does the Saudis to a lot of programs bilaterally. So the obligation falls squarely on the developed world. Now, I started talking about the paragraph 97 of the GST. It's a finance discussion, but the developed countries do not want to confine it to a finance discussion. They want to discuss all the GST outcomes in that paragraph, in that outcome, because their real reason is you muddy the waters, you blur this, you make the pool messed up with mud and poison and pollution and so on and so forth, so that you don't see what the real finance is supposed to be. So these are the big fights. A lot of what's happened in Bonn were about informal notes and texts, which have options and so on, which will have laid the foundation for the big fight that will happen in Baku. The last few seconds that I have on the global goal and adaptation, because this was a very important outcome in Dubai, where there was thematic areas that were agreed to in terms of what governments have to do in terms of setting targets for how to measure the adaptation, whether it's in water, it's food security, it's health, it's poverty eradication and sustainable development, cultural sites, very important aspects. And the DCJ needs to pay more attention to adaptation as well. And so in Bonn, it was how do you develop those you have the targets, how do you develop the indicators? The big fight was between the developed and developing, can we have technical experts ad hoc expert group, technical expert group, because you can't have the adaptation committee do this. The adaptation committee is basically negotiators. What is needed is actually people with skills, technical experts who will be able to look at indicators from a local, national, and international level. And that's the task. And that was the big fight. So again, it was also about finance, because developed countries did not want any new group to be established. Anything on finance, they wanted shut down, including on national adaptation plans. That tax also did not move forward because there was mentioning of finance for implementation of NAPS, for the National Adaptation Plan. So it's finance, it's finance, it's finance. And this is what we need to understand all across all the issues. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Meena. I really appreciate it. The way you highlighted what are some of the key demands that we were pushing at WON and how they fared, but also spotlighting some of the, as always, some of the dirty tactics that we see developed countries continue with during the negotiations inside the halls. We'll discuss more. If people, please feel free to ask your questions in the chat. But we'll now move on to Tamra Gilbertson from Indigenous Environmental Network to walk us through how Article 6 developed and some of the challenges that were there, and what do some of the outcomes mean as we head to COP29. But also, if I'm not wrong, as we head to CBD COP 16 as well, right? So over to you, Tamra. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to use a PowerPoint because it just sort of helps me stay on track. Can you hear me okay? Does it work? Yep. Okay, great. So I'm going to start at the end. So the last day, the meetings went into closed sessions, and we don't really know what happened, to be honest, behind the closed doors. But what I do know is that when one of the negotiators who represents a country in the global south came out, he came and said to me, he's like, they don't want to do any of it. They don't want to do any of the finance. They don't want to do anything. All they want now are carbon markets. And so that's all that's what they're pushing now. And I think it's really important to highlight this, because not only is it that Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which is where the carbon markets lie, are slated to be, really close to being finished by COP29 and into next year. But also because they're calling it climate finance. They're saying that if we get the carbon markets running, this will generate climate finance. And so therefore, it's even more important that we get them up and running. These are not work programs. These are not dialogues. These are actual negotiations that have been underway for almost a decade, or like 8 years now, that are very close to being finished. And so there's a real urgency around rejecting carbon markets right now and understanding what's at play in Article 6. So I'm going to walk through some general areas, but also link this then up to what happened and where we're at. This gets a little technical, so bear with me, and I'll share the slides at the end as well. So Article 6 of the Paris Agreement is considered cooperative mechanisms. This is, again, where the carbon markets live. Article 6.2 specifically deals with how nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, as Meena pointed out, can be used as a way to sort of trade units. So for example, if the host country that's exceeding its NDC target, and they have extra so-called, built up, like they have extra projects and they've exceeded it, they can trade units, across to another country. And then the buyer country purchases these units. These are called international tradable mitigation outcomes. And they purchase the units to then say that they're meeting their NDC goals. Okay, so a country, for example, if they're really not meeting them, they're polluting a lot, so they say, they can purchase the ITMOs or the units and say that they're meeting them. So it functions like a carbon market. This is linked, 6.2 is linked to the private sector and regulated markets like emissions trading systems or cap and trade systems. Each country is able to create its own internal policies and operationalizing trade. But there are certain rules and regulations that are being built underneath the Article 6.2 framework or architecture. It's also important to note that some of these are already up and running. So, there has been one trade at least that's been made between countries, even though not all of the rules have been made. Some of the key decisions that were made in Bonn under Subsidiary 60 were really around negotiations on sequencing, authorization, and issuance, application of a first transfer, addressing inconsistencies in the registry database, and then how to deal with, like, does an issuance come before? What is the sequence of the authorization? And the sticky point here for countries in the global south were and has been and continues to be basically arguing that this type of sort of extra oversight from 6.2 is not needed, and that countries should be able to move units from the 6.4 into 6.2 to then be used as ITMOs without a ton of oversight. And I'll talk about that more in 6.4, where it's a bit more relevant, but they're linked together. Okay. Also important to note that this registry database is being built right now. It's getting closer to being finished. And then one other sort of key outcome here was that it was made as a decision that emissions avoidance, not emissions reductions, not emissions removals, but emissions avoidance, be pushed to Substa 68 in 2028. The only country really pushing for emission avoidance in both 6.2 and 6.4 is the Philippines, and sometimes other countries back the Philippines, sometimes they don't. But the agreement was that this would be kept out until it could be discussed more after at Substa 68. And that's important in terms of forests, and in terms of using forest as carbon offsets. But that doesn't mean that forests won't be used as carbon offsets. And I'll explain that in a minute. So 6.4 is the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism. This is like that will take over from the clean development mechanism under the Kyoto Protocol, or the CDM. This is now kind of referred to loosely as the mechanism registry or the mechanism database. And this functions in terms of countries being able to trade units on a centralized platform. And this is overseen by the Article 6.4 Supervisory Body. And the supervisory body approves the methodologies, they'll register projects, they'll manage the database, and a lot of the fundamental decisions, and including writing up what is a carbon dioxide removal and these types. Now, to be clear, the supervisory body did not make any decisions at Bonn. The negotiations were under Substa 60, okay? So these are two separate decision-making tracks. And so what happened was very similar to what was happening in 6.2, in terms of basically the tensions around sequencing and issuances and authorization, a need to harmonize both 6.2 and 6.4 so that they are similar, also pushing avoidance back to 2028. And so there were two drafts that were forwarded to Substa 61 that will be basically negotiated at COP29 in Baku. One is a general conclusions document, and one is a more detailed decision-making document. And this is both 6.2 and 6.4 have both of those documents. So regarding the content of the draft decisions for both Article 6.2 and 6.4, they both dealt, again, with the similar issues of units contributing, sequence of authorization and issuances contributing to NDCs. And as it stands, both drafts reflect parties' inputs, and they are expressed as options in each sections, and basically more work will entail section by section discussions and choosing which options are most suited to reach consensus in Baku. So you can find those online, and I'll show you a link in a moment. So those are kind of the major outcomes. Now, the supervisory body for 6.4 met with the stakeholders on the first day. And what is still yet to be decided and very important is around carbon dioxide removals, which includes both biological removals, which is where forests, soils, marine projects, ocean offsets, nature-based solutions lie. And on the other side of removals is engineered removals, like carbon dioxide removals, direct air capture, and other forms of technological or engineered removals. This will be discussed by the supervisory body before Baku. And so we're keeping an eye on that really carefully. We have managed and been relatively successful at stalling that process as much as possible. And again, we need to really bind together here and try to continue to stall this, or end them completely, but stall them. Another issue in the supervisory body is around the sustainable development tool. These are what we used to kind of call safeguards in 6.4. It's very dodgy. Again, this will be a decision that they'll be making before or to bring to COP29. Last year for COP28, the CMA kicked it back and said, go redo the removals document. So they're doing that now. And also a big red flag is that REDD+ is being considered as an offset under Article 6.4. We did an intervention on that in Bonn and spoke out against it as DCJ with under the umbrella of the NGOs. The next meeting of the supervisory body will be July 15th. The agenda is already set. You can find that online. There's open submissions to speak to the agenda. Those are due in a week from today. So let me go on then. I guess I did talk about that. And then 6.8, 6.8 is non-market-based approaches. This may include a mix of like dodgy conservation funds, debt for nature swaps, payments for environmental services, biodiversity projects, climate smart agriculture, 30 by 30, linking to the Convention on Biological Diversity, REDD+. We don't really know yet. But what we do know is that the web-based platform is up and running. This has all been passed. It looks like an auction block for nature, really. The private sector and conservation NGOs are invited to provide finance, and it's very much behind a password wall. And so transparency is a huge, huge issue here. And it's something that we must continue to monitor closely. The final thing I want to talk about is the clean development mechanism. Now, this is something that most people are like, well, so what? It's over, right? It's not over. It's still running. And what's interesting is that these were really heated negotiations in Bonn. There's trouble trying to shut it down, with Brazil, India, and China really wanting to keep it open, mostly because they still have credits and money in the system, by far the majority. The EU and the EIG want to shut it down and split the money between building up Article 6, the registry and mechanism databases, and put a small portion of money into the adaptation fund, whereas the African group of nations, AOSIS, and others want the majority of the money put into the adaptation fund and shutting down the CDM as soon as possible. So So there are different battles going on in that room. There is $47 million sitting in the CDM. And also there was a huge battle on saying, well, what's happened to the money in the last couple of years? Because when the Secretariat made a breakdown of the money, it wasn't completely clear where that money was being used. So there are big questions being raised in regards to transparency. One of the things that occurred to me, and I think this is really important for us to discuss, is that there is no sunset clause for Article 6. And what I mean by that is that if the proponents of Article 6 are arguing that it's going to actually work to reduce emissions, then there should be a time and a plan to shut down Article 6 if it's really going to work, and what that looks like. Because what I see in the room of the CDM is that there's no agreement of when and how to shut it down. And that should be the same for Article 6 before it becomes operationalized. At the very minimum, there should be a shutdown plan or phase out plan or a shutdown plan. So it's something I would like to discuss more. All of the texts are available at this link. You can download them and read them. Again, this is quite urgent. These discussions and negotiations are due to be finalized. And then Article 6.4 and 6.2 are due to be operationalized fully next year, and many of the other pieces. So if you have ideas how to fight this, and let me know, and let's keep working together to end these huge false solutions and dangerous distractions, because once these are up and running, it's a lot harder to shut them down. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Tamra. Super helpful and so much in detail. That's really appreciated. But can I ask, there's already a question in the chat, and maybe because we still have few seconds, could you, do you think you would be able to take that question now, or do you want to like just put it in the chat first?
I'm open. Let me see, I'm looking in the chat.
Just at the bottom, the last one.
Okay. What do you think about the ocean dialogue, which was also about carbon dioxide removal, marine and so forth? Does Article 6 also cover blue carbon? If it does, which we don't know yet, we don't know what will be defined as a carbon dioxide removal. And that's something that as DCJ, we challenged them on in the stakeholder dialogue on the first day. We said very clearly that they're negotiating carbon dioxide removals, but they're not saying what a carbon dioxide removal is. Does it include marine? Does it include blue carbon? Does it include marine geoengineering? Does it include so-called ocean fertilization? Does it include CCS? And they haven't told us. And so the sort of most technical answer I can say is possibly, but until they actually write out and explain it. And the thing is that I'm sure they know very well what they intend to include as carbon offsets, but they're not telling us, and it's not written down. So this is something that, again, we need to keep track of very carefully. We need to work together across groups, cross constituency. We need to build power quickly, because I don't think that, the movements are ready for this, and we need to really bind together and fight hard. And so thank you for that question.
Thanks, Tamra. Okay, so I think we'll keep moving on, but please keep asking your questions in the chat. I'm sure everyone would be happy to answer them. And we also have a lot of allies here, like we have Home Alliance here as well, who will also be, I'm sure, happy to answer some of the questions. I'm not putting you on the spot, but just telling people that please use chat to keep engaging with each other. We'll now move on to Leon from War on Want to walk us through Just Transition Work Program.
Thank you. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so I will keep it as big a picture as possible because there are some brilliant summaries provided by TWN, which the reference docs will they be shared, Rachitaa, or anyway, Meena has already referenced the TWN briefings.
I can share, no worries. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, they summarize the kind of the detail of the negotiations, the back and forth in more depth. There's also a reasonable carbon brief summary from SB60 well they quote me, so maybe I'm biased in recommending it, but I think they also give a fairly favorable analysis that DCJ would support. The Just Transition Work Program negotiations. Well, the SBs in Bonn kicked off with a 2-day dialogue, just overlapping with the start of the talks, which was focused on NDCs, and no one could really tell where the choice of the topic had come from. It wasn't very popular with Global South countries, and it wasn't popular with civil society groups, and it wasn't clear. It didn't feel like it was a transparent process to decide on that topic for the dialogues, but nevertheless, we participated as DCJ. We were given 1 seat, which I filled on behalf of the Just Transition Working Group, which if anyone wants to join, you can contact me for more details. It's co-convened by myself and Chadley Zadora from EPMDD, who was going to do this summary, but I stepped in at the last minute, so also forgive me if anything is a bit rusty because I wasn't fully prepared for stepping in. But anyway, we had the 2 days of dialogues where countries were sharing how Just Transition was fitting into their NDCs. There was a lot of talk. There were also some strong interventions by parties on topics, on the issue of how the topics were chosen, for instance, with a lot of countries saying that they weren't happy with the selection of NDCs as being the first topic. Interventions from us as DCJ, from other CSOs, most of whom were kind of suggesting that we needed to have a broad understanding of Just Transition, and that for Just Transitions to be included in NDCs, it needed the finance, it needed international cooperation, it needed the mechanisms of support that would allow those countries who don't have the resources, the means to implement Just Transitions to implement them. It wasn't clear on when the report from the dialogues would come out. And indeed, that was another point of contention, with many parties suggesting that there needed to be a written summary report at the end of each dialogue so they could actually inform the negotiations, rather than having 2 days of negotiation, 2 days of dialogue, and then going into a completely separate set of negotiations unconnected from those dialogues. So it felt like it was the way that it had been organized was part of the broader tendency within the Just Transition Work Program, which is very new, but it's already a tendency emerging to try and shut down meaningful process and practice, and to just keep it to dialogue, to talking. And when the negotiations did finally kick off, there was quite a big tension between those of us from civil society groups, particularly environmental NGOs, broadly aligned with CAN, Youngos, and the Women and Gender constituency, as well as Global Southern negotiators, that the Just Transition Work Program needed to have a broad mandate, a broad understanding of transition, whereas the developed countries wanted to keep the focus more narrowly on jobs. The G77 plus China was kind of emphasizing the need to encompass sustainable development and broader development challenges as part of the Just Transition Work Program, and that to do that, they would require financial and technical support. where so you had a handful of kind of developed countries who were trying to kill that aspect of the JTWP, a more expansive version, and unfortunately there was some tension with Tongos, who it seemed like they were worried that there would be no agreement on just transition, and so they were pushing back against broader definition of just transition and of understanding just transitions in the plural, and saying that it means different things in different contexts, and it needs to be an expansive definitions. And the Tongos were kind of saying just transition should be. They were kind of more aligning with some of the developed countries' positions around just transition being focused on workers. In terms of some of the substance of the disagreement with negotiations, one key dispute or disagreement arose around the actual, the modalities, the way that the work program would proceed. A lot of the global northern countries, the US, Canada, EU, Japan, and the UK, suggested that the agreement that emerged out of Dubai around the Just Transition Work Program was almost like the end product, that was the end point for negotiations. They saw the decision as being kind of closed, and they didn't want that. They framed any discussion of additional modalities, additional ways of working as being a reopening of negotiations, which I think is a disingenuous understanding. It's not true to, well, it's not true to how negotiations go, right? That you just the Just Transition Work Program, as agreed in Dubai, was agreed to have dialogues, and it agreed to continue focusing on just transitions. That didn't mean that it couldn't also include the proposal of the G77 in China, which was for a work plan, so something with a bit more teeth, a bit more substance, something that actually could deliver outcomes beyond the dialogues. But yeah, this was opposed, this proposal, by global northern countries. In terms of the way that the negotiations went, there were clashes over the draft conclusions language, which was seen to be unbalanced in favor of developed countries. And as I said, developed countries were strongly resistant to adding new themes or new activities. They cited budgetary constraints as a reason for this. Whereas developing countries were saying that the Just Transition Work Program shouldn't be mitigation centric, and it should reflect each country's circumstances, and it should focus on sustainable development and poverty eradication. So a much more expansive and justice-based version of the Just Transition. There were huge kind of contentions around unilateral trade measures, which came up with, at one point, the US claiming that the WTO is the place that these should be raised. Whereas I think, as many people know, the US has been stalling in the WTO over the appointment of judges, are they called, or arbiters? I'm not sure. But anyway, they've been dragging their feet. So this was a flashpoint where lots of the G77 plus China countries pointed out that the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, of the EU, or the Inflation Reduction Act of the US would effectively function like a tax on production in the global south. It was acting as a tariff and a barrier to trade, a unilateral barrier to trade, and it was seen as undermining, I guess, the spirit of international cooperation that's necessary for financing the just transition. The final conclusions were very procedural, so there was no consensus on the work plan suggestion by the G77 reached. There was no consensus reached on the work plan proposed by the G77. Excuse me. There were instead procedural conclusions and an informal note with placeholder text on the work plan. So this is going to be where things will probably be picked up in Baku, and I think we're likely to see the same cleavage, the same fights taking place around whether or not the just transition is broader in scope than just work and just workers in oil and gas sectors, or whether or not it is broader to understand, to encompass the vision of sustainable development that was flagged by Global South negotiators. And there was no commitment, to deliver anything of substance, really. It was a very procedural conclusion. There were no commitments on finance, or I mean, it all of the picture as outlined previously by Meena around finance and the need for support. The just transition kind of mirrored those dynamics in terms of there being a stalling by global northern countries who were refusing to make any commitments that might have any budgetary or financial implications, i.e. that would require them to provide support. It's just other things that felt important or salient would be that there was quite a good alignment by civil society organizations in terms of our interventions with women and gender, especially, but also across other groups, IPOs and CANI, where we were raising the same concerns around the narrowing of scope of the Just Transition Work Programme, the lack of ambition of richer countries to see the Just Transition Work Programme as being anything other than a kind of talking shop. The divergences that I mentioned with Tungos are hopefully going to be picked up directly in a call that I know Victor is attending, and Chadley as well, on behalf of DCJ, along with some other with other CSOs, because I think Tungos realize that they're pulling in a different direction on this, and they to their credit, they're expressing a desire to get ahead of it. So we'll see how those talks go, but I think the degree of alignment was quite helpful for boosting support for the G77 and positions around having a more expansive vision of the Just Transition Work Programme. There was another point I was going to make. Oh yeah, that for a lot of the Global South negotiators said that this, and this is a theme that came up in Dubai, but they said that this stream of negotiations, the Just Transition Work Programme, is a kind of a really important part of is a really crucial part of the negotiations for them, that they can't really envisage the climate talks continuing without action on this stream. So there was a lot of investment in time and effort to push on this area of just transition, with an eye on the COP in Brazil, and I hope that there could be a kind of a more expansive conclusion reached there. Whether or not we'll see anything in Baku that sets that up remains to be seen, but I guess the point is to try and hold the line and not allow backsliding and not allow the program to be closed down. I think that's probably, I can't think of other things, but happy to answer questions on specifics if there's anything that stands out to people.
Thank you so much, Leon, for a very detailed debrief, and also how negotiations and different country blocks responded and approached this. And like Leon shared, one of the biggest fights with Just Transition Work Programme is the scope of the program. And as we all know that as Global South, we want it to be a much broader scope, but we can see quite active pushback from developed countries to keep it as narrow as possible. Because like Meena said, that would just mean them giving us money which they don't want to do it. So like Leon said, that is going to be one of the biggest fights for us. And also, as Leon said, please feel free to ask your questions in the chat. I'm sure everyone here would be happy to respond. We'll now move on to Elodie with our last presentation to talk about the food and agriculture, and just give us an overview about that. to you, Elodie. Thanks.
Thanks, Rachitaa. So on the Chairman joint work on agriculture and food security, the joint work had been stalled for a year and a half on governance issue, but it has finally moved forward. It doesn't mean that the governance issue has been solved. If you remember, it was a request from the G77 to set up a coordination group. It's for climate for implementation of climate action on agriculture. So again, around finance. So they've decided to still be discussing that coordination group on the side of the negotiation, in mind to have a mention of the creation of this group in the outcome of the Chiang joint working that will end in 2.5 years. So to have this kind of implementation and coordination group in place for the next round of negotiation on agriculture. So that was good. We had 2 weeks on negotiation. Usually food and ag negotiation are only over a week. So this allowed to catch up on lost time. Basically, they managed to agree on a roadmap, including 2 workshops and the workshop topics. So we were quite happy with the workshop topic, although we try to push to make up for the loss of time to have workshop starting at COP29, but we didn't manage to get that. So at COP29, they will be discussing the setup of an online portal. The online portal objective is to collect best practices and case studies of sustainable agriculture approaches. What is unclear is who will be able to access that portal and upload case studies. We've heard that it would be selected international NGOs. So we don't know if it's going to be also open to private sector. So it's something that we will be keeping an eye on at COP29. At the SB62 next year in June, we will have a workshop on systemic and holistic approaches to implementation of climate action on agriculture into plans. So we were happy to have the joint work taking the direction of really looking at the food and ag sector from a holistic perspective. Then at COP30, they will be discussing the outcome of the workshop. And at June SB64, then in June 26, the workshop topic will be on progress, challenges, and opportunity related to identifying needs and assessing means of implementation for climate action in agriculture and food security. And then at COP31, they will be discussing the outcome of this workshop. So like what Leon mentioned, there were good coordination across constituencies with CanAg, but also with IPO and Women and Gender. And we managed to get, there's been that definition of sustainable agriculture that's been flying around in the text in the start of this joint work that defines sustainable agriculture as agroecology and regenerative agriculture, but also alongside full solutions such as climate smart, nature-based solution, sustainable intensification, biotechnology, and AI. So we managed to get that removed first down to the annex and then further totally out of the text. Then also within the text, there were a multi-stakeholder platform such as M and FAST that were proposed to take a coordination role within the negotiation. So we managed to get that totally out as well, because we know that it would undermine not only inclusivity, participation, but also open the door to really full solution and the private sector within the negotiation as well. When looking at other negotiation streams that also are relevant to agriculture, there is the adaptation negotiation stream that are developing indicators that are also relating to agriculture, although we didn't have the bandwidth to follow that, but we will be feeding into that between now and COP29. Also, the Climate Technology Center and Network Board is also working on a report on climate technology for agri-food system transformation. So we are looking into that. If anyone knows anything about that, we found out someone from Yongo working on that. So we're going to try to find out more what this is about, and also prevent false solution as well. Then on the side of all this official negotiation, you've got all the presidency initiative from the UAE with the leaders' declaration. There was a side event on this with there is a, I don't know how to call it, a mechanism called the Technical Cooperation Collaboration that has been set up to support the inclusion of climate action in NDCs. And the members of this Technical Cooperation Collaborative are FAO, CGRI, WWF, and World Bank, amongst others. We also have the FAST initiative. So that was one of the multi-stakeholder platform that were being suggested as taking a coordination role under the climate change work on agriculture, because it has been financed by Germany. So Germany and EU were pushing for that. It's got 3 pillars: know where we are, data to shape policy, support adaptation effort, but it's really untransparent. It's really, if you looked at their website, you can't find out who is a member, either from governments or for the private sectors. The board seat for civil societies go always to the same NGOs who are closely who have close ties with the private sectors, WWF, World Farmer Forum, CGRI, and so on. So what they've said their priorities were access to finance, knowledge and capacity building, policy support, and also activating finance coming from MDBs to work on agriculture specifically. So we have campaign against MDB that are investing in intensive and industrial animal agriculture. So they're already investing, but in the wrong places. The FAST initiative will link to the Emirate Declaration, because we've got all these initiatives that seem to be working in silos, or there is a big announcement at a COP and then nothing happened, and you hear about them again at the next SBs or the next COP. But what seemed to be happening is that they're trying to at least close the silos. And when we were at this side event, you had the negotiator from the climate change joint work attending, which was a first as well. and also linked to presidency. So there is also the Azerbaijan presidency, as another petrol state is interested in putting the focus as well on food system transformation, as we've seen the UAE presidency doing. So they are setting up their own food initiative called Harmonia. So apparently the aim of this Harmonia initiative is to really bring all these different initiatives together under the same umbrella. There will be a focus on technology though. And what else? Yeah, they keep repeating that they will put farmers at the center, and especially younger farmer and women. So let's see how this pan out. And Azerbaijan has recently joined the methane pledge. So they are really interested in tackling the food system, the methane coming out of the food supply chain. I guess again as a diversion to really look at the fossil fuel industry. So that's it from me. So I don't know if anyone else on the call would like to add anything I might have missed. Please feel free.
Thank you so much, Elodie. And we have a question from Meena for you in the chat about Denmark's new proposal of charging farmers with cows of 100 euros per cow as a climate response. So you're free to take that question now or also respond in the chat. Can you see the question?
Yeah, I'm reading it now. Thank you, Meena, for that question. So I haven't looked into it really in depth, but what I've seen so far is that there hasn't been massive backlash, at least from the farmers. So have there been really open conversation with the farmers in the lead up to that might be the answer, but we actually have an office in Denmark, so I need to find out about that, and I can get back to you on that.
Thank you so much, Elodie. And also just for everyone, like Elodie said, generally we don't hear a lot about the food and agriculture negotiations in these spaces. They tend to move slow. But considering that, you know, the COP30 in Brazil might be a COP that focuses on food, land, nature, and forests, it is really important and crucial for us to keep a lookout of how some of these conversations are moving, and also already start strategizing for some of that. So we have come to an end.
Sorry,
Yeah,
Rachitaa, I actually forgot to say something that was positive in the Azerbaijan presentation on their food initiative is that they talk about land change as well, which is also a first, you know, recognizing how agriculture is really a driver of land change, so connecting these issues. So it seems to be less and less silo, but let's see what's coming ahead. Yeah.
Thank you so much for flagging that, Elodie. So we have come to an end of all the presentations by speakers. I now would like to invite if anyone has any questions or if people want to share their own reflections about the negotiations about SB60 or in general about our road to COP29, please feel free to raise your hand and moderate. Or if any of our speakers want to come back in to talk.
Muted, Radhika. Radhika. You were
Sorry?
muted for a while.
Oh, sorry, maybe it's my internet. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll pause for like 2-3 minutes to see if someone wants to raise their hand and come in and share something or ask questions. These can also be questions about, you know, like on road to COP29, like if you have questions about all of this too, as we head up to COP29, please feel free to ask those also. If you want to share all your own strategies, please feel free. I think I have a question from. Maybe Meena, you can help with that question from Mariana.
Yeah, it's an important question, but I think what's been again problematic is that the UNFCCC rules of procedure are still in a draft, and that's amazing. It's been we are at COP29. We are going to COP29, and since still there is no consensus on going for a vote. The main reason being that developed countries do not want any vote being taken on finance issues. That's been one of their big pushback. So they keep opposing going for a vote, because if they did go for a vote on finance, you can imagine developing countries having a larger say. And then for developing countries also, they don't, some of the aspects of in relation to mitigation and others, they also don't want to be pushed by developed countries in the wrong direction. So they too don't want on the non-finance aspect. So nobody likes a vote. So they are at an impasse at the moment, and it'll continue to be by consensus. But what we have been talking about is actually a larger issue. It's not just about vote or no vote or consensus, but rather we as Rachitaa rightly flagged earlier, the divide and rule, which always happens with the developed countries. They issues that they don't want to advance, they divide and rule, they split the countries, like they tried to do that in the loss and damage fund. Luckily, the small islands and the LDCs didn't fall for that. They stayed united, and then they got a good outcome. So one of the biggest strategies that we have to do is, one, to make sure that the developing countries are united, particularly around the G77, and also to make sure that expose the North in their dirty tactics of splitting and divide and rule and bullying. The other also is that the conflict of interest policy, which with Rachel Rose and others and many kick big polluters out. These are the larger issues in terms of improving the process, so that you don't have a process that is actually non-transparent. And also, many of the parties talk about party-driven. If you look at the way in which from Cancun onwards how decisions are taken, actually at the end of the day, there's a small kitchen cabinet that actually begins to do the actual drafting. It goes out of the hands of the negotiators and into the hands of a small group, and then a few people see what happens. So that's not the way to go. They should be more transparent. If you go to New York, you actually see in the UN General Assembly and so on, line by line, and in the CBD, those of you who have been much more friendly to civil society, indigenous peoples and all that. The UNFCCC is one of the worst processes, I must say.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Meena. Also want to highlight from Secretariat's perspective, like from DCJ Secretariat perspective, like as we engage with as constituency focal points, we also keep pushing the Secretariat to keep opening spaces for civil society, which we have seen in past few years have been unfortunately shrinking inside UNFCCC. So we've seen like a lot of dialogues, a lot of conversations moving behind something called informal, where generally the civil society is not allowed. We had a major issue with Article 6 last year during COP28, when a lot of negotiations moved under this informal process, and civil society was kept out of it. But as constituency focal points, like Victor and I, we keep engaging with the Secretariat to prevent as much of these situations as possible, so that spaces are open to us, so that we can keep intervening and keep influencing as much as possible. But like Meena said, it has been becoming increasingly challenging over the years, for sure. But we also have huge wins to show what our power can do, like loss and damage fund in COP27. So I want to just check in. Does anyone else want to come in on any questions, and if you have questions about strategies, like what does this mean for COP29? please feel free, or your own experiences, your own strategies, something that you're planning to do, any campaigns that you're planning to do in the interim, in the lead up to COP29, please do share with us. This is the space for us to build internal solidarity and strengthen our movements. Anyone? Okay. Okay, so then I'll take another opportunity to share, which Meena has already highlighted, that in Bonn this year, a lot of groups came together to launch a campaign called Global Escalation on Climate Finance. In the coming months, we will be sharing, in the coming weeks, we'll be sharing more information about this campaign that we are planning to do at a global level, where we will be raising some of the demands that Meena has already highlighted as we lead up to COP29, with reparation being one of our central issues under finance. So please keep a lookout for more information from us on that. This is a Global South driven campaign, and we are inviting like our members, our friends, our allies all over the world to join in this campaign to raise these collective demands. And then so we have identified some key moments where we are hoping to do like some on ground mobilization, some digital campaigning, and also take it up to COP29 and push harder there. Yeah, like I said, please keep a lookout for that. Sorry, I have something in chat. And then, yeah, I want to see just before we wrap up, because we still have 7 minutes left. Like Meena said, that one of the biggest challenges that we have is this divide and conquer tactic that Global North has been pushing, largely led by US and other G7 countries, other G7 countries hiding behind US, as it tends to be the bully and the bad guy. So I want to check if Victor can take few minutes to just talk about what some of those strategies can look like to counter US when we go to spaces like this, and just general reflections in general. Victor, you have like 3-4 minutes to share that if you. Oh, thanks.
Hi, Rachitaa, thank you. Let's see, in 3 or 4 minutes, I will first share one document with you that didn't make it out of Bonn, but you'll see a draft text that the G77 plus China was trying to get agreed, but the US and the other rich polluting countries blocked it. And this will continue to be debated into Baku for COP29. And it has to do with the reporting by the Annex 1 countries. Those are the biggest polluters like the US and Europe, and their failure to live up to their climate targets and do what science has urged them to do, and to provide the financing that they said that they would do. If you look at that draft text there, you'll see some of the numbers. For instance, according to the Annex 1 countries' own reporting, they only provided 51 of the 100 billion promised in climate finance. And with the US, we see that the US has reduced its emissions by only 1.5% since 1990. So we are digging into these numbers in the US and planning to hit them with it somehow. Yeah, sad state of the political debate in the US right now with elections coming up, how we get traction on these things. But it's certainly something that we know a lot of voters care about. We, of course, can't get directly involved in the elections, but we have our ways of educating movement leaders and people who are involved in those things. The most important thing is to message that the US has to do its fair share. We've taken up most of the atmospheric space, have most of the historical responsibility, and have to be the first and the fastest to phase out. So, and we also have the biggest planned expansion of fossil fuels. So you may have heard Meena talking about the importance of US and the other big rich countries who still produce fossil fuels, how in those NDCs, they need to put their pledges filled with the measures for the phase out. So in the case of the US, that means the pause that President Biden put on the LNG export permits, that pause must be made permanent and put it into the NDC. I mean, that's just a very small initial step that the US must do to really show countries that it's doing its fair share, beginning with the full phase out. And then, of course, the climate finance that's so key to helping other countries to do what they want to do in terms of mitigation. So, Rachitaa, probably my time is up. I'll pass it back to you. If you do want to know more about this, please contact me. I will put my email in the chat box here, because yes, again, we in the US are going to be focusing on making the strongest NDC that we can, because we know there's maybe no more important way to support our allies in the global South than the US doing its fair share. Thanks, Rachitaa.
Thanks, Victor. Sorry, before you go, can I ask, do you mind answering Ranjana's question on what does the GST outcome, sorry, what was the question? How will the GST outcomes be taken up in COP29, you or Meena or anyone else?
Sorry, from Ranjana?
Yes.
No one? We can highlight.
So the question is, how will GST outcomes be taken in COP29?
Well, Meena, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
You want to?
You don't want to do it?
Better that you do.
Okay. Well, as I explained, there are two things, right? On the mitigation side and on the adaptation side, and even on loss and damage, I think a lot of what we need to do is to make sure that the fight is at the national level to inform the NDCs, because that's what the global stocktake is supposed to do. This is what the world, the collective progress is and the lack of progress is. And so what do we do in terms of the NDCs? And so what Victor has been talking about in terms of what they are doing in terms of the NDCs of the US is an excellent example. And so I think this is where maybe more people can get engaged, and maybe the DCJ can help a lot more in terms of if people want to have a much more discussion around what can they do at the national level. The other is the finance issue of the GST outcome, which is what I spoke about in terms of the UAE dialogue on paragraph 97. The TWN is a special update on that one. Please read that, because that is going to be the biggest fight in Dubai in terms of the GST follow-up. Is it about a finance follow-up, or is it about all the issues follow-up? The issue about all the issues follow-up is that nothing can follow up if there's no finance. So I think that is really the big push that we need to ensure that developed countries make sure that there's a way of tracking finance, because that has been the one that has been fallen off the ground. There's no way of tracking. Well, there is the transparency framework, but that's another issue.
Thank you so much, Meena. I think we are at the end. I just want to thank everyone, our speakers, for joining, taking out this time to give this debrief, very important session for our members. Just a reminder for everyone that DCJ has working groups on finance, for solutions, real solutions, food and agriculture, just transition, and also climate and militarism. It is open, of course, for DCJ members, but also our friends and allies. Please get in touch with Victor or me or any of our speakers here who are in these groups to engage there. That's where a lot of our strategizing, a lot of our campaigns come from. And we strongly encourage more members to participate there. We will keep sending out information relevant to negotiations and also the campaigns throughout the year. We will be putting out a wrap-up of everything that DCJ members did during Bonn by the end of this week. So please keep a lookout for that. All our interventions, press conferences, actions, and all our collective work. And lastly, I just want to thank the interpreters for taking out their time to, make sure that this session can be as inclusive as possible for our members, and also to everyone who took out time to be here. Thank you, everyone, and long live international solidarity. Bye. Take care.
Goodbye. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good night. Thanks, Meena.